Benjamin Chandler's voice cut through the crowded saloon like a blade through summer heat, low and steady and absolutely unmistakable in its fury. Every single one of you owes her a kind word. She built that business alone, and not a soul in this town lifted a finger to help her do it. The room went dead quiet. 40 men and women frozen mid-drink, mid-sentence, mid-breath. The piano player's hands lifted from the keys. Even the flies seemed to stop buzzing in the thick August air of Redemption, Texas, in the year 1882. Benjamin Chandler never spoke like that. In 3 years of living outside town on the Chandler Ranch, the man had barely strung together more than 10 words at a time. He paid for his supplies, tipped his hat, returned to his land. Quiet as stone, hard as iron, impossible to read. The kind of man who let his silence speak for him and whose silence said plenty. But tonight he was standing in the center of the Silver Spur Saloon with his jaw set and his dark eyes blazing and his big, work-roughened hands balled at his sides, and he was speaking. He was speaking loud enough for God himself to hear. Shepard came to this town with $40 and a broken wagon wheel, he continued, his voice dropping lower now, which somehow made it worse, made it more dangerous, made the whole room lean forward without meaning to. She asked 3 of you for help and 3 of you turned her away. She mixed her own mortar, she laid her own boards. She painted her own sign in the dark because she couldn't afford lamp oil and had to wait for moonlight. Someone at the back of the room laughed, a short, ugly sound. Benjamin turned his head slowly toward the source of it and the laugh died immediately. "I am not finished," he said. And no one in Redemption, Texas, had a single word to say about that. But to understand why a man like Benjamin Chandler was standing in that saloon saying those words on that sweltering August night, you have to go back 9 months, to the brittle cold of November 1881, to a broken wagon on the edge of town, and a woman who refused to ask for help twice. Shepard arrived in Redemption on a Tuesday, which the locals would later say was appropriate, because Tuesdays in Redemption were the worst day of the week. Supply wagons broke down on Tuesdays. Calves were born dead on Tuesdays. Marriages ended on Tuesdays. The town seemed to carry a particular spite for that middle day of the week, and Anna rolled in on a Tuesday with a cracked axle, a crate of dry goods, a box of sewing tools, and exactly $42 to her name. She had come from Missouri. Not running from something exactly, though there were things in Missouri she was glad to leave behind. A father who had gambled away the family farm. A man she had been promised to who turned out to be married to 2 other women simultaneously. A community that whispered about her as though her father's failures and her almost husband's betrayal were somehow her own sins to carry. She was 26 years old and she had decided that if the world was going to make her start from nothing, she would at least choose the nothing she started from. She had read about Redemption in a gazette. Small but growing, the article had said. Population pushing 400, 2 general stores and one that had just closed down, leaving a gap in the market. She had a skill with fabric and thread, and an eye for what women wanted to wear in heat and dust without looking like they had given up entirely on beauty. She had a plan. What she had not planned for was the axle. She climbed down from the wagon seat in her brown traveling dress with the mud on the hem and the dust in her hair, and she looked at the cracked wood, and she did not cry. Shepard was not much of a crier. She had learned early that tears cost energy she could not afford and changed nothing anyway. She walked into the first building she reached, which happened to be the hardware store owned by a man named Gerald Potts, who was 50 years old and had the disposition of a man who had been chronically disappointed by life and intended to share that disappointment as widely as possible. "I need a wheel spoke and a replacement axle brace," Anna said. "My wagon is stuck at the edge of town, and I have limited funds, but I can pay something now and the rest within the month once I have established myself." Gerald Potts looked at her the way men like him looked at women alone, which is to say the way a cat looks at a sparrow, assessing angles and weakness simultaneously. "Established yourself doing what?" he asked. I intend to open a dressmaking and dry goods shop, Anna said. Gerald Potts made a sound through his nose. There's no building available. The old Callaway storefront on Main Street is available. I have already confirmed this. He stared at her a moment longer. I don't extend credit to women without a husband to guarantee it. Anna felt the familiar burn of injustice move through her chest like a coal pulled from the fire, hot and dangerous and absolutely real. She kept her face calm. She said, "Thank you for your time," and she walked back out into the cold November wind. She tried the livery stable next. The owner, a man named Hector Cole, was kinder in his manner but equally useless in his result. "Can't spare the time, miss," he said, not unkindly. "Got 3 horses to shoe before sundown and a contract job out at the Henderson place at dawn. Sorry." She tried the blacksmith, a young man named Pete Warwick, who was willing but did not have the specific brace she needed, and said he could order it but it would take 2 weeks to arrive. 2 weeks. She stood in the cold air outside the blacksmith's shop and looked at the clouded November sky and thought very carefully and very precisely about her situation. She had a wagon she could not move. She had $42. She had a crate of dry goods and a box of sewing tools and a plan. She went back to the wagon. She unloaded everything she could carry in 2 trips into the old Callaway storefront, for which she paid the first month's rent of $4 to the widow Callaway herself, an arrangement made through a letter months prior. She put her trunk and her crates inside. She pulled the door shut against the cold. She went back to the broken wagon, and she spent the rest of the afternoon figuring out how to fix it herself. She was still figuring it out, kneeling in the frozen mud at the edge of the main road with a wrench she had borrowed from a sympathetic woman named Dorothea Banks, when Benjamin Chandler rode into town. He saw her before she saw him. That was often the way things went with Benjamin. He was the kind of man who watched before he spoke, who learned a room before he entered it, who let the world reveal itself to him rather than announcing himself to the world. Some people found it unnerving. He had long since stopped caring what people found. He was 31 years old. He had owned the Chandler Ranch for 4 years, having inherited it from an uncle who had no children of his own, and had recognized in his quiet nephew a man who would actually work the land rather than sell it for quick money. Benjamin had grown up in New Mexico, the son of a rancher and a schoolteacher who had both died of typhoid fever in the same terrible week when Benjamin was 17. He had spent the years between 17 and 27 doing work wherever work was to be found, drifting in the not-quite-tameless way of young men who have had the future knocked out of them before they knew what the future was supposed to look like. The ranch had given him back something solid to stand on. He was not unhappy. He was not looking for anything. He was just a man riding into town for flour and salt and possibly a new blade for his hay scythe, and then he saw the woman in the brown dress kneeling in the mud with a wrench and a problem. He pulled his horse to a stop. He looked at the wagon. He looked at her. "That axle brace is cracked through," he said. Anna looked up at him. She had a smear of grease on her cheek, and her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her eyes were the color of winter sky just before it decides whether to snow or not, that particular shade of gray-blue that cannot quite make up its mind. She was not soft-looking, and she was not fragile-looking, and she looked at him with the directness of a person who had already been condescended to twice today and did not have patience for a 3rd time. "I am aware of that," she said. "I am attempting to stabilize it enough to move the wagon off the main road." "You'll need a brace," he said. "Pete Warwick doesn't have one, but I might have a compatible piece back at my ranch." She studied him for a moment. Not the way women sometimes studied him, trying to determine if he was dangerous or lonely or available. She studied him the way a person studies a tool, assessing usefulness. "How far is your ranch?" she asked. 4 miles out. "I can ride back, check, and return in under 2 hours if the piece is there. And if it is not there, then I will tell you it is not there and you will not have lost anything except the hope of it." Something in her face shifted very slightly, though not quite to warmth, more like to a careful neutrality that was not dismissal. "All right," she said. "I appreciate the offer." He tipped his hat and rode on, got his flour and salt from the general store, and rode back out to the ranch with an additional purpose now, which was to look in the old tool storage behind the main barn where his uncle had kept every spare piece of metal and wood and hardware he had ever acquired in 40 years of ranching. The brace was there. It was not a perfect match, but it was close enough to work. Benjamin wrapped it in oilcloth and rode back into town. She was still there, sitting on the wagon seat now, eating something from a cloth, straight-backed in the cold air as though the cold had simply not been informed that it was allowed to bother her. He showed her the piece. She examined it with the same careful assessment she seemed to bring to everything. "This will work," she said. "What do you want for it?" "Nothing," he said. She looked at him with something sharper than neutrality now, not quite suspicion but its first cousin. "Why?" "Because you need it and I don't," he said simply. He helped her fit it, not doing it for her but working alongside her, passing tools when asked, holding the wagon steady when the leverage required more than 2 hands. She knew what she was doing. She didn't ask unnecessary questions and she didn't make unnecessary conversation, and she thanked him with the directness of someone who meant it rather than the performance of gratitude people gave when they felt they ought to seem more grateful than they actually felt. "Anna Shepard," she said, when the wagon was stable enough to move. "Benjamin Chandler," he said. "Are you the Chandler who owns the ranch out on the eastern road?" "I am." She nodded once. "I will be opening a shop on Main Street in the coming weeks. If you need any mending done or any fabric work, I would be glad to return the favor." "I will keep it in mind," he said. He rode home. He did not think about her obsessively. He was not that kind of man. But he did think about her with a specific quality of attention, the way you think about something that has caught the edge of your awareness without quite demanding the center of it yet. The directness of her. The way she had not thanked him with more than he had earned. The gray blue of those winter eyes. The cold of November deepened into the cold of December, and Anna Shepard opened her shop. She called it Shepard's Dry Goods and Tailoring, painted on a wooden sign in careful, even letters. The building was drafty and the floor needed work, and the back wall let in a thin, cold whistle from a gap she stuffed with rags until she could afford proper caulking. She had no counter at first, just the crates she had arrived with, arranged strategically. She worked from dawn to past dark every day, and the work was both the shop itself and the making of things to sell in the shop. She had a particular gift with fabric. She could look at a woman and understand immediately what silhouette would make her feel strong, and what cut would move well in the Texas heat, and what color would make eyes brighter or skin warmer or a face more memorable. She could make a dress from 4 yards of calico that looked like it had been made from 8. She could mend a work shirt so the mend was invisible. The town was curious about her in the way small towns are curious about newcomers, which is to say intensely and not entirely kindly. The women came in ones and twos to look, and some of them bought things, and some of them merely looked. The men were largely indifferent to her existence except for the few who weren't, and Anna Shepard handled those with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had been handling those since she was 17. She was not popular in Redemption. She was not unpopular either. She was simply new, and new in a way that did not quite fit the categories the town had already sorted everyone into. She was not a wife. She was not a schoolmarm. She was not a saloon woman. She was a businesswoman, which Redemption in 1881 did not quite have a category for when the businessperson in question was a woman of 26 on her own. There were whispers. There were always whispers in small towns, those little dark secrets people kept and traded like currency, and the whispers about Anna Shepard ranged from mildly unkind to outright cruel. That she must have a dark past to be alone like this. That a proper woman would have family support. That she was too ambitious for her own good, which in the vocabulary of certain people in Redemption was a terrible failing. Benjamin heard the whispers. He heard them the way he heard most things in town, which was clearly and without comment. He went in for supplies every week or 10 days, and he was aware, in the way that quiet, observant people are always aware, of the specific temperature of a community's attitude toward one of its members. He stopped in at Anna's shop in January, partly because he had genuinely torn the knee of his work trousers badly enough that he couldn't fix it himself, and partly, though he would not have admitted this to anyone including himself, because he wanted to see how she was faring. The shop had transformed since November. There was a proper counter now, made of rough sawn planks she had evidently sanded herself to a reasonable smoothness. There were fabrics displayed on the wall on wooden dowels. There was a shelf of notions, thread and buttons and trim, arranged by color. There was a wood stove in the corner pushing out decent heat. There was order here, the specific kind of order that comes not from having everything you need, but from making everything you have work as well as it possibly can. She took his trousers with the same practical directness she brought to everything, examined the tier, told him the repair would take 2 days and cost 15 cents, and asked no personal questions. He found himself coming back more often than the interval of his actual mending, and dry goods needs strictly required. He told himself this was because the shop was conveniently located on the route between the livery stable where he kept a second horse and the general store. This was not untrue. It was simply not the whole truth. By February he was stopping in once a week, and sometimes Anna would be working, and they would not speak much, only the necessary words, but there was a quality to the silence between them that was different from other silences he had known. Not uncomfortable, not demanding. The kind of silence that grows up between people who have independently decided that they do not need to fill every moment with noise to justify their presence in the same space. In March, she told him, with no particular preamble, that Gerald Potts had told a customer of hers that Anna had a dishonest character, and that women who operated businesses alone were, in his word, irregular. The customer had repeated this to Anna, not knowing whether to believe it, and Anna had gone directly to Gerald Potts and told him clearly and without raised voice that if he spoke about her again in that manner, she would take the matter to the county sheriff and let the law sort out whether slander was something the courts took seriously. Gerald Potts had not repeated his remark. But he had also not been the last person in Redemption to find a way to undercut Anna Shepard's business, her reputation, her right to simply exist in the space she had carved out for herself. Benjamin listened to this with his customary stillness, and then he said, "Good." Anna looked at him. "Good that he said it, or good that I confronted him?" "Good that you confronted him," he said. She studied him for a moment with those winter eyes. "Most people think I should have let it go." "Most people think a lot of things that are wrong," he said. Something shifted between them in that moment, slight as a change in wind, easy to miss if you weren't paying the right kind of attention. Anna Shepard looked at Benjamin Chandler and saw, perhaps for the first time, that he was not being kind to her in the way people are sometimes kind to those they pity, which is a performance that ultimately says more about the performer's own comfort than the recipient's needs. He was being kind to her in the way people are kind to those they respect, which is a different thing entirely. She brought him a cup of coffee she had been keeping warm on the stove. She poured herself one as well and sat across the counter from him in the wooden chair she had positioned there for customers who wanted to discuss larger orders. And they talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with dry goods or mending, about the history of the land around Redemption and the particular character of Texas soil, and whether the drought the old-timers predicted was likely to materialize this summer. He rode home in the late afternoon with the March wind cold against his face and something warm and complicated sitting in his chest that he did not quite know what to do with. By April it was known around Redemption that Benjamin Chandler stopped at Shepard's shop on his regular trips to town. This information passed through the community in the way all information passed through small communities, quickly and with elaboration. The elaborations were predictable. People decided that Anna Shepard had set her sights on a man with a ranch, which meant she had a hidden motive for her friendliness toward him. They decided that Benjamin Chandler was being led by his loneliness into a trap set by a woman who was not what she appeared to be. Benjamin was made aware of these elaborations by three separate people who each believed they were doing him a favor. His neighbor to the north, a rancher named Charles Webb, mentioned it with studied casualness over a property line dispute they were sorting out. The woman at the general store made a remark about how Anna seemed to have a talent for getting men to do things for her, which was said with the specific kind of smile that is not a smile at all. And a man at the hardware store, a friend of Gerald Potts, said outright that Benjamin ought to be careful around women like that. Benjamin said nothing to any of them. He finished his business and went home and thought about what it meant that people were looking at Anna Shepard and seeing a schemer rather than a woman who had repaired her own wagon axle in the freezing mud without asking twice for help. He went into the shop the following week and he told Anna simply what people were saying. Not to alarm her, not to give her warning as though she were a child who needed protection, but because he thought she deserved to know, and because he suspected she already knew but had chosen not to raise it with him herself. She was quiet for a moment when he finished. She was threading a needle with the kind of automatic precision that comes from 10,000 repetitions, and she did not stop threading the needle while she was quiet. "People see what they are prepared to see," she said finally. "They are looking at a woman alone in business, and they are finding explanations that fit their expectations. I am not the first woman this has happened to, and I will not be the last." "Does it anger you?" he asked. She tied off her thread and cut it clean. "Yes," she said. "I have learned to function in anger rather than being stopped by it. The anger is useful, the self-pity would not be." He looked at her for a long moment. She did not look back, was already beginning her stitch, hands moving with the quiet certainty of competence. "I think you are one of the most capable people I have met," he said. Her hand stopped, just for a second, then continued. "That is not a thing most people say. Most people," he said, "are not paying attention." The spring came on in earnest, and the shop grew. Anna had 3 women coming regularly for dressmaking commissions now, wives of the more prosperous ranchers and the bank manager's wife, and those commissions were real money compared to the repair work that had been keeping her afloat through the winter. She expanded her dry goods selection. She bought a proper dress form, second-hand from a town to the east, and set it in the window with one of her best pieces on it, a green wool day dress with intricate collar work, and it drew the eye from the street. She hired a girl named Margaret, 16 years old and quick with her hands, as an assistant for Saturday afternoons when the foot traffic was heaviest. She paid her a fair wage, which in 1882 for a 16-year-old girl in a small Texas town meant something. Benjamin noticed all of this. He noticed the dress form in the window. He noticed when the awning she had rigged above the door was replaced by a proper wooden overhang she had apparently contracted a carpenter to build. He noticed when she had a new lock fitted to the front door and a second lamp bracket installed to improve the evening lighting. Each of these changes was small, but together they told a story of a person building something with great deliberateness, brick by brick, with no one handing her the bricks. He found this beautiful in a way he could not have easily articulated. Not beautiful in the way sunsets or well-bred horses or fine things were beautiful, but beautiful in the way that watching a person be fully and wholly themselves was beautiful. She was made for this work. She was doing this work. The alignment between the person and the purpose had a kind of rightness to it that moved something in him that he had not felt moved in a very long time. He was falling in love with her. He understood this by May, not as a sudden revelation, but as the gradual recognition of something that had already been true for some time, and was only now demanding to be named. He sat with the knowledge carefully, the way you sit with a horse you don't know yet, still and patient, letting it get used to you before you ask anything of it. He did not change his behavior. He did not suddenly become more attentive or more solicitous or more anything. He simply continued to be who he was when he was with her, which was more himself than he was almost anywhere else, and he let the thing between them grow at its own pace. Anna, for her part, was aware of him in ways that she was not quite ready to name. She was aware of the particular quality of stillness he brought into a room, the absence of anxiety or performance in him that was genuinely unusual in her experience of men. She was aware of the way he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually listening, the way you could see it in the slight forward lean of his head and the quality of the questions he asked when he spoke. She was aware of the fact that he was handsome in a way that had nothing to do with prettiness and everything to do with the particular kind of competence that writes itself into a person's face and bearing after years of real work. She had been betrayed before. The almost husband in Missouri, whose name she had deliberately let herself forget, had taught her the particular lesson of hidden motives. He had been charming where Benjamin was quiet, easy in a way Benjamin was not easy, and everything about him had been a performance concealing a secret and a manipulation and ultimately a cruelty. She did not believe Benjamin Chandler was performing, but she also knew that belief was not proof. She kept her awareness of him compartmentalized, off to the side of her daily working self, in the way she had learned to keep things that required more careful handling than the present moment could afford. June came with heat that settled over Redemption like a wet wool blanket and did not lift. Anna's shop was hot in the afternoons, and she began keeping the door propped open in a way that let her see the street, which she told herself was purely for airflow and had nothing to do with the particular rhythm of Benjamin's weekly appearances. It was in June that the trouble with Victor Hale began. Victor Hale was 44 years old and owned Hale's General Merchandise, the larger of Redemption's two general stores. He was not a villain in the way stories sometimes require, a man with black intentions and a sneering mouth. He was something more ordinary and perhaps more dangerous, a man of small-town authority who had built that authority over 20 years, and did not intend to share the commercial territory of Redemption with a woman who had arrived 9 months ago and was doing better than people had expected. He began, subtly, to undercut her. He stocked a selection of sewing thread and buttons and basic fabric at prices just below Anna's. He let it be known that his store had always carried notions and that Anna Shepard was nothing new. When a woman came into his store asking where to find the dressmaker, he sent her to a woman across town who did mending but had no real skill, while knowing perfectly well where Anna's shop was. Anna noticed this. She noticed most things. She adjusted where she could, negotiating harder with her suppliers, expanding the service work she did that the general store could not replicate. But the pressure was real and it cost her money she did not have to spare. She said nothing about it in town. She did not want to appear to be complaining, which she knew would be used against her. The narrative of the difficult woman, the woman who couldn't survive without crying unfair treatment, was one she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of applying to her. She told Benjamin about it on a Wednesday afternoon in late June when he came in and found her going over her ledger book with the particular set of her jaw that he had learned to read as controlled stress. She told him plainly. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Is there anything you need from me?" "No," she said. Then more carefully, "Not materially, no. I will adapt." "I know you will," he said. And the way he said it was so simply certain, so utterly lacking in the qualifying doubt that people almost always applied when they said something like that to her, that she had to look down at her ledger book again for a moment. He helped her in a different way, one she did not ask for and did not know about until later. On his next several trips to town, he casually mentioned Anna's shop to every person he had reason to speak with, not in an effusive way that would have seemed strange from him, but as useful information. He told Charles Webb's wife that Anna Shepard was doing excellent work and that the collar on the dress she had made for the bank manager's wife was the finest needlework he had seen. He told the owner of the hotel that if they needed curtains or linens repaired, Shepard did that work and did it well. He told Pete Warwick the blacksmith the same. He said it the way he said everything, quietly and with the weight of a man who did not waste words. The effect was gradual but real. New customers appeared at Anna's door who mentioned, when asked, that they had heard Benjamin Chandler spoke highly of her work. She figured out what he had done in July, when the third such customer mentioned his name. She stood in her shop after the customer left and held this information in her hands like something unexpectedly fragile and examined it from all sides. He had not told her he was going to do it. He had not done it as a trade or an obligation or a demonstration of his own generosity. He had simply done it because he saw something real being threatened, and he had the means to help prevent that outcome, and he used those means, without fanfare, without expecting anything back. She thought about this for a long time. On his next visit she waited until the shop was empty except for the two of them, and she said, "I know what you have been doing." He looked at her. He did not pretend not to know what she was referring to. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No," he agreed. "You should have told me first." He considered this. "You would have told me not to," he said. She opened her mouth to deny it and found she could not. "Yes," she admitted, "I would have." "I knew that," he said. "But it was the right thing to do regardless." She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that it passed the comfortable threshold of ordinary looking and became something else. Something that required naming or stepping back from. She did neither. She said, "Thank you, Benjamin." It was the first time she had used his given name. She had called him Mr. Chandler until now. He heard the difference and something in his face changed, not much but enough. "You are welcome, Anna," he said. July deepened into August, and the heat became the kind of thing that changed people, pushing away inhibitions and pretense the way a long drought pushes away everything but the roots of things. He asked her to dinner at the end of July. Not at the saloon and not at the hotel's dining room, both of which would have been public in ways that would have added weight he did not want to add without knowing what she wanted. He asked if she would let him cook for her at the ranch. She was very still for a moment. "That is a significant invitation," she said. "I know what it is," he said. She looked at him with the full directness she brought to everything that mattered. "I will accept it," she said, "but I want to be clear about something first." "All right," he said. "I am not looking for someone to solve my problems," she said. "I am not looking for a protector or a patron or someone to put their name over my door. I have built this shop. I am the one who built it. If you are asking me to dinner because you think I need saving, I will decline, and I will ask you to continue being my acquaintance because I value that, but nothing more." He looked at her with something that was absolutely not offense or deflation. It looked, if anything, like relief. "I am not asking you because I think you need saving," he said. "I am asking you because I have spent the better part of 8 months looking forward to the part of my week when I can come to this shop and talk with you, and I would like to know if you feel anything similar." The shop was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a horse moved on the packed dirt street. "I do," she said quietly. "Then dinner," he said, "is just dinner, and whatever comes after it we can figure out as we go." She rode out to the Chandler Ranch on the last Saturday of July 1882 on a horse she borrowed from the livery stable, and Benjamin came to the end of the road to meet her, which she would later tell him was unnecessary, and which she privately found almost more moving than anything else he could have done. The ranch was not grand. It was a working ranch, honest in its proportions, the house solid and plain with a good porch, the barn larger than the house by necessity, the corrals well built and well maintained. There were cattle in the east pasture, a manageable herd for one man working largely alone. There was a kitchen garden beside the house that surprised her, tomatoes and beans and something she thought might be squash. "You grow your own vegetables," she said. "My mother did," he said. "I kept the habit." She had not known about his mother. She had not known about his father. Over dinner, which he cooked with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, a beef stew with biscuits that were unexpectedly good, She learned about the typhoid that had taken both parents in the same week when he was 17. She told him about Missouri, about her father's gambling and the man she had almost married and the particular loneliness of being surrounded by community and knowing the community has decided you are somehow deficient. She told it plainly, without self-pity, the way she told most things, and he listened the way he always listened, with full attention and no performance. They talked until the sun was well down and the cicadas were loud in the dark outside. When she prepared to leave, he walked with her to where her horse was tied and stood in the warm dark and looked at her with his dark eyes that she had spent 8 months learning to read. "I would like to do this again," he said. "So would I," she said. He helped her mount, his hand at her stirrup, and she rode back to town through the warm Texas night with the stars enormous overhead, and something she had not felt in a very long time, the tentative, dangerous, hope-flavored feeling of a door that might be opening. August brought the crisis. Victor Hale had grown bolder in his campaign against Anna's business through the summer. The subtle economic pressure had not driven her out as he had apparently expected it would, and this failure seemed to have pushed him toward less subtle approaches. He had begun actively spreading stories about her, not the vague whispers about her character that had been circulating since her arrival, but specific and deliberate fabrications. He told several prominent women of the town that Anna was using inferior fabric and charging premium prices. He told the owner of the hotel that she had failed to complete a commission on time for a rancher's wife in the next county, which was entirely invented. He told anyone who would listen that she had come to redemption fleeing debts in Missouri, which was also untrue. Anna found out about the fabrications in pieces over the first week of August. Each piece arrived with the fresh sting of injustice, not the dull, familiar ache of being doubted, but the sharp, specific pain of being lied about. She had been careful. She had been honest. She had done everything right and better than right, and she was being dismantled by a man with a louder voice and more years of accumulated credibility in this town. She went to Victor Hale's store. She was calm. She had chosen to be calm because she knew that anything less than calm would be used against her immediately. A woman in business who raised her voice was hysterical. A woman who wept was weak. A woman who was cold and precise was calculating. She had no good option except to be herself, which was honest and direct, and to say what needed to be said regardless of how it was received. She walked into Hale's general merchandise at 10 in the morning when it had a handful of customers, and she said, in a voice meant to be heard, "Mr. Hale, I am aware that you have been telling people things about my business that are not true. I am telling you now in front of these witnesses that I know it, and that I want it to stop." Victor Hale turned from the shelf he was stocking and looked at her with the particular condescension of a man who has decided that his behavior is justified and that anyone who challenges it is the problem. "I am sure I don't know what you're talking about, Miss Shepard," he said, in the tone of someone who knows exactly what is being talked about and does not intend to stop. "I think you do," she said. "I am asking you once directly to stop. I will not ask again." "You're an unmarried woman running a small shop in my town," he said, and the contempt in his voice was naked now, no longer bothering to dress itself up. "I have been a businessman in redemption for 20 years. I think you might want to consider the weight of those two facts before you come in here making demands." The other customers in the store had gone very still. Anna held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "I have noted your position," and she turned and walked out. She went back to her shop and she sat behind the counter, and she felt the full weight of what she was up against. Not just Victor Hale. Victor Hale was only the most obvious face of a larger problem, which was that redemption in 1882 had very limited language for a woman doing what she was doing and had decided, largely, to use that limitation against her rather than expand the language. She did not want to give up. She refused to give up, but she was tired. She was tired in the deep way that has nothing to do with sleep, and everything to do with having spent 9 months building something in the face of resistance while maintaining the appearance of ease, because any display of difficulty would be taken as evidence that she should not have tried. She was sitting with this tiredness, working through it rather than at it, when the bell above her door rang and Benjamin Chandler walked in. He looked at her and knew immediately that something had happened. He had learned her face over months of careful attention, and the face she was wearing now was not the controlled calm of her ordinary demeanor, but the particular stillness of someone who is holding something very heavy and is not sure how much longer they can hold it. She told him what had happened at Hale's store. She told it plainly, as always, but plainly in the way that is also the most honest kind of vulnerability, offering the facts without the armor of indifference. He listened to all of it. When she finished, the shop was very quiet except for the sounds of the August street outside. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "Since June in the current form," she said. "Since November in earlier forms." He was quiet for a moment. "And you have been dealing with it alone." "I have always dealt with things alone," she said. "I know," he said. "I know that." He paused. "But you do not have to now." She looked at him carefully. "Benjamin," she said, "I do not want you to fight my battles for me." "I know that too," he said, "but I can tell the truth. And the truth is that you built this business alone, and every person in this town has watched it happen, and most of them have not given you the simple courtesy of acknowledging it. Victor Hale is lying about you, and the town is letting him lie. I can say what is true. I can say it loudly enough for people to hear it. That is not fighting your battle, that is being a witness." She was very still for a long moment. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked, and it was not a suspicious question, not the guarded question she would have asked a stranger. It was the question of someone who needed to understand something important. He looked at her with the full, unguarded directness that she had come to know meant he was about to say something true. "Because I love you," he said. "I have been thinking about how to say that for months, and I cannot find a better way to say it than plainly. I love you, Anna, not because you need help. Because of who you are when you don't, the way you work, the way you think, the way you said thank you when I brought the axle piece and meant exactly as much as you said and not a word more. The way you confront a man like Potts and then go back to your sewing because there is work to be done. I love all of it, and I think about it all the time." The silence in the shop had a different quality now. Not the silence of heaviness, but the silence of something opening up, like a door in a wall you had forgotten was a door. Anna Shepard looked at Benjamin Chandler for a long moment. "I am not easy," she said finally. "I have never wanted easy," he said. "I will not stop working," she said. "I will not fold my ambitions up and put them in a drawer because I have someone to lean on. This shop is mine. It will stay mine. I would not want it any other way," he said, and his voice had the specific quality of a man speaking a complete truth with no reservations. "I love you too," she said. "I have been trying not to for several months. I was not successful." He crossed the shop, and he stood in front of her across the counter, and he reached out and took her hand, his work-roughened fingers around hers, and they stood like that in the August heat with the street noise outside and the smell of fabric and sawdust in the air, and neither of them had anything else that needed to be said for a while. That evening, Benjamin Chandler rode into town and walked into the Silver Spur Saloon, which was not something he did frequently enough for it to be unremarkable. He walked to the center of the room and he said, in a voice that stopped the piano player mid-chord, "I have something to say about Anna Shepard." And then he said it. "Every single one of you owes her a kind word. She built that business alone, and not a soul in this town lifted a finger to help her do it." He stood there in the lamplight of the Silver Spur, and he said everything that needed saying about what Anna Shepard had done in redemption since November, and about Victor Hale's lies, and about the specific cowardice of a community that watches a person work without acknowledgement and then allows them to be slandered when they succeed. He did not shout. He did not threaten, except by implication, and the implication was sufficient. He was Benjamin Chandler, who had been in this county for 4 years and had never caused a problem for anyone and was known to be solid as the ground he ranched. And when a man like that stood up and said what he said, it carried a weight that performance could not replicate. The person who had laughed did not laugh again. Victor Hale was not in the saloon that night, but what Benjamin said in the Silver Spur had reached him before breakfast the next morning. The entire town of Redemption had heard it in one form or another within 24 hours. Small towns have extraordinary acoustic properties when something genuinely important is said within them. The days that followed were interesting. Anna walked into her shop the morning after Benjamin's speech to find 3 women waiting at the door with packages for mending, and a note slipped under it from Dorothea Banks, who had lent her the wrench on the first day, that said simply, "I should have done more than lend you a wrench. I am sorry for that. Come for tea." Gerald Potts crossed the street to say that he wanted to apologize for his behavior in November, which he did in the stiff, uncomfortable manner of a man who has been pushed toward an apology by social circumstance rather than genuine contrition. But Anna accepted it anyway because she had decided some time ago that the perfect was the enemy of the functional. Victor Hale did not apologize, but he also did not say another false word about Anna Shepard. The combined weight of Benjamin's public speech and the resulting shift in the town's attitude toward Anna was enough to make the calculus of continued lies unfavorable to him. Over the following 2 weeks, something happened in Redemption that was more significant than anyone would have named it at the time, but that Anna would think about for years afterward. The town adjusted. The story it told about Anna Shepard, which had been the story of the irregular woman with unknown motives and questionable character, began slowly and imperfectly to become the story of the woman who had built her business with her own hands. It was not complete. It was not perfect. Small towns do not perform complete reversals of opinion. They perform gradual recalibrations. But the shift was real and it was felt. Anna's business expanded through August and into September. The green wool dress in the window had been replaced twice now, each new display piece more ambitious than the last. She had hired Margaret 2 additional days a week. She had finally caulked the gap in the back wall with real caulking instead of rags. She ordered a bolt of fine silk from San Antonio and took 3 commissions within a week. She and Benjamin were seeing each other twice a week, once when he came into town and once on Sunday afternoons when she rode out to the ranch, or he came in to take her walking along the river west of town, which was a thing people did in Redemption when the heat eased and the light turned golden and the evening was still enough that you could hear the birds. The love between them was growing in the way that love grows between 2 people who are both very clear about what they are and what they want, not in the explosive urgent rush of passion that burns fast and leaves ash, but in the steady deepening way of water carving a riverbed, patient and persistent, and ultimately reshaping the landscape. He was deeply, genuinely interested in her mind. He asked her about her decisions, the business decisions, why she had chosen the particular layout for the shop, why she priced her services as she did, what she thought about the possibility of expanding to formal wear for the special occasions that the wealthy ranching families in the county organized 2 or 3 times a year. He asked these questions not as tests, and not as the questions of a man who already knows the answers and wants to see if she does, but as genuine inquiries, the questions of someone who finds another person's thinking interesting. She asked him about the ranch with equal genuine interest, about the specific challenges of ranching in Texas soil and climate, about the relationship between small independent ranchers and the increasingly powerful cattle corporations that were beginning to make their presence felt in the county, about whether he intended to grow his herd or diversify his operation. He had thought carefully about these things and he answered carefully, and she listened in the way she had watched him listen, with real attention. In October, he asked her to marry him. He asked her on a Sunday afternoon on the porch of the ranch house with the late October sky wide and blue above the flats, and the cattle moving slowly in the east pasture, and the smell of the kitchen garden, spent now in the autumn, still faintly in the air. He did not make a speech. He did not frame it as an offer of protection or provision. He said, "I want to be married to you. I want us to make a life together. I think we would be good at it." She was quiet for a moment with her hands folded in her lap and her winter eyes looking at the horizon. "The shop stays mine," she said. "Unambiguously," he said. "I will not take your name professionally. I will be Anna Shepard at the shop and Anna Chandler in other contexts, and I would like that to not be a problem." "That is completely sensible," he said. "I want to be asked, not managed," she said, "about decisions that affect both of us. I will not be surprised by things that concern me." "I know," he said. "I should have told you I was going to speak to people on your behalf in the summer. I should have asked first. I understand that." She looked at him then. "Yes," she said, "you should have, but I also understood why you did it the way you did it, and I am not still holding it against you." "I know that too," he said, and the ghost of a smile moved across his face because she was so fundamentally herself in every moment, and he found this endlessly wonderful. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it, or yes to the question?" he asked. "Both," she said. They were married in December 1882, 13 months after Anna had arrived in Redemption with $42 and a cracked axle. The ceremony was held at the small church on the east end of Main Street, and half of Redemption attended, which would have been remarkable if anyone had thought carefully about how different that reception was from the one the town had extended to her when she arrived. Dorothea Banks made the wedding cake. Margaret, Anna's assistant, served as a witness. Benjamin's neighbor Charles Webb, who had been one of the people to warn Benjamin about Anna's supposed hidden motives, and who had since had the grace to revise his opinion, stood up as the other witness. Anna wore a dress she had made herself, ivory cotton with pale blue embroidery at the collar and cuffs, extraordinarily beautiful in its simplicity, the kind of garment that announced its maker's skill quietly rather than loudly. Benjamin wore his best suit, which was not particularly fine but was well pressed and sat on his broad shoulders with the ease of a man comfortable in his own body. When the minister pronounced them married and Benjamin leaned down to kiss her, she put her hand against his cheek with a tenderness that those watching said afterward was the most genuinely moving thing they had ever seen in that church, which was saying something, because a lot of moving things had happened in it over the years. They moved Anna's things out to the ranch that weekend. Not all of her things, because she maintained the back room of the shop as a workroom and continued to keep long hours there during the week. But her trunk and her personal belongings and the small wooden box she had carried from Missouri that contained a locket that had been her mother's and a letter from a schoolteacher who had once told her she was more capable than anyone in the room, including the teacher. The ranch felt different with her in it. Benjamin had lived there alone for 4 years and had made the place functional but not particularly warm, and Anna's presence did not make it merely warmer in the superficial way of decorative things, but in a deeper way, the way a space changes when it is genuinely inhabited rather than simply occupied. She had opinions about the kitchen layout that were correct. She had opinions about the placement of the 2 armchairs in the main room that turned out to be right. She brought her energy into the space without filling it with noise, which was exactly what Benjamin's quality of quiet required. He learned her in the mornings, which she owned with a specific productive intensity, up before him, and already working through the day in her head before she had finished her first cup of coffee. He learned her in the evenings, which were easier for her, when she would sit across from him in the rearranged armchairs with mending or planning work in her hands, and talk or not talk with equal comfort. He learned the sound of her sleep and the particular weight of her presence in the bed beside him, and the way she said his name differently depending on what she needed from the moment, practical or affectionate, or the way she said it when she woke from a bad dream in the winter dark, and he pulled her close and she let herself be held, which was not something she did easily with anyone but had learned to do with him. She learned him too. She learned the way he held certain things inside rather than speaking them, not because he was hiding them from her, but because he was still working out how to articulate them, and she learned to ask the questions that unlocked those interior spaces rather than waiting for him to volunteer them. She learned that he had a quiet, precise humor that he deployed rarely, and with good timing, and that she found funnier than almost anything else in the world. She learned that he woke sometimes in the night and went to stand on the porch and look at the stars, a habit from his years of solitude, and she learned to leave him to it, and to have a cup of something warm ready when he came back in. The winter of 1882 into 1883 was the kind of winter that the Texas plains did not often produce, but occasionally did, cold in a way that went past discomfort into genuine danger, with ice storms that came 3 times in December and January, and froze the water troughs solid and tested the barns, and required a constant vigilance. Benjamin worked the ranch through it with the focused intensity of a man who knew what he was doing, and Anna helped when she could and managed the shop through the weeks when the cold made the roads difficult and foot traffic dropped, adjusting, adapting, finding the work in the space available. By February things were easier, and by March 1883 the grip of the winter had released its hold on the land, and the grass came back green, and the cattle were looking better, and Anna's business had expanded further. With a letter of commission from a ranching family 30 miles east asking her to come and consult on a substantial wardrobe order that would involve silk and fine wool, and the kind of detailed work that she loved most. She told Benjamin about the commission at dinner with the particular brightness she had when something genuinely excited her. "How long would you be away?" he asked. "4 or 5 days at most," she said. "Possibly a week if the order is as large as the letter suggests." "All right," he said. She looked at him. "You are not going to argue about it." "Why would I argue about it?" he said. "This is your work. This is a good opportunity. Should I be arguing about it?" "Most men would want their wives at home," she said, and she was watching him carefully, testing the way she tested things that mattered, looking for the hidden resentment that she suspected must be there somewhere. "I want my wife to be who she is," he said. "Who she is includes taking a 4-day commission 30 miles east when the work is worth going for. I will manage the ranch, and I will miss you, and you will come back." She was quiet for a moment. "I keep waiting for you to become someone else," she said softly. "Someone who thinks like Victor Hale or Gerald Potts or any of the other men who have decided that who I am is the problem." "I know," he said. "You can keep checking. I will still be the same person." She went on the commission, and it was everything she had hoped. The ranching family, the Garfield family, had 3 daughters who needed dresses for a summer social season, and a matriarch who was a woman of genuine taste and strong opinions, who looked at Anna's portfolio samples and said, "Finally, someone who understands what a woman actually wants to look like rather than what they think she should want to look like." The order was large, and Anna spent the week in a state of productive focus that was its own kind of joy, that specific deep satisfaction of work that uses your full capability. She came back to the ranch on a Friday evening, and Benjamin rode out to meet her on the road, which she told him was unnecessary, and which she privately found almost more moving every time he did it. She was pregnant by April. She figured it out herself before she mentioned it, spending a week being certain before she said anything, which was very Anna, not wanting to introduce uncertainty into the equation. She told him on a Sunday morning on the porch with their coffee, matter of fact and direct as always, watching his face. What she saw there was the thing she had been learning over months to trust because it was always genuine. He went very still for a moment, and then something moved across his face that was not complicated at all, not worried or calculating or anything, but simple and complete joy. He reached across and covered her hand with his. "Are you well?" he asked first. "I am very well," she said. "Are you happy about this?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about all serious things. "I am," she said. "I am also thinking carefully about the shop." "Of course you are," he said. "What are you thinking?" "Margaret is more capable than I have been fully using her," Anna said. "If I increase her responsibilities and salary before the later months make heavy work difficult, the shop can continue to function fully without me being there every day." "That sounds like a good plan," he said. "It is a good plan," she said, and he smiled, which made her smile, which was still, months into their marriage, something that surprised her, how easily this man could move her to the open expression of something she had spent so many years keeping carefully inside. Benjamin Chandler, as a father-to-be, was the same person he was as a husband, which is to say consistent and attentive, and unbothered by what other people might think he should be doing or feeling. He fixed the back room of the house that had been used for storage, not with extravagant fuss, but with the same quiet competence with which he did all things, building a proper crib from lumber he selected carefully, making the room warm and practical. The summer of 1883 was hot, and Anna's shop thrived, and Margaret rose to the expanded responsibilities with a capability that Anna had suspected and was gratified to have confirmed. Anna worked through June and July at a reduced but still significant pace, doing the design and commission work that required her specific skill and letting Margaret handle the counter and the simpler repair work. Their son was born on a September morning in 1883, early enough in the month that the summer heat had eased to something manageable. He was healthy and loud, and arrived with the kind of decisive energy that suggested he had made up his mind about being born and intended to do it thoroughly. Dorothea Banks served as midwife, having done so for half the women in Redemption over the past 15 years, and she declared both mother and child in excellent condition. Benjamin held his son for the first time with a steadiness that was completely characteristic and an expression that was entirely unlike his usual controlled reserve, open in a way that Anna had seen very rarely and which she found unspeakably beautiful. They named him Thomas, after no one in particular, because Anna felt that children should have names that belonged entirely to them rather than the weight of someone else's history. Thomas Chandler was from the beginning a person of strong opinions and persistent energy, which delighted Benjamin, and which Anna looked at sometimes with the rueful recognition of seeing her own best and worst qualities reflected back at her at very high volume. Anna was back in the shop 2 months after Thomas was born, which the women of Redemption found variously admirable, alarming, and predictably Anna, depending on who you asked. She brought Thomas with her in the mornings on the days Benjamin needed to work the range, setting up a basket behind the counter where Thomas could sleep while she worked, and which arrangement functioned better than anyone who had not met Thomas could have predicted, because he had, surprisingly, his father's quality of comfortable silence and would lie in his basket and observe the shop ceiling with what Anna described to Benjamin as a philosophical disposition. Redemption in 1883 and into 1884 had completed the adjustment that had begun after Benjamin's speech in the Silver Spur. It was not a perfect community, and the injustices that had greeted Anna in 1881 were not entirely resolved. The deeper structures that made a woman's business success suspect where a man's was celebrated were not something one speech could dismantle. But the specific opposition to Anna Shepard had been neutralized and replaced by something more like respect, the grudging first and then the genuine kind, the kind that comes from watching someone do excellent work long enough that denial becomes impossible. Victor Hale's general store continued to operate, but he had abandoned his campaign against Anna, and they existed in the town in a kind of armistice that suited both of them. Gerald Potts had become one of the shop's regular suppliers for certain hardware goods Anna needed, which was not exactly friendship, but was functional. The bank manager's wife, whose name was Eleanor Marsh, had become something like a genuine friend to Anna, which was not something Anna had expected, and which she valued carefully in the way she valued most things that had taken a long time to arrive. Anna's second pregnancy arrived in the summer of 1884, and this time the shop's operation was smoother because Margaret had been fully managing the counter for a year, and a young woman named Clara had been brought on to assist with alterations, so the infrastructure Anna had built could function as a genuine business rather than one that required her personal presence for every transaction. Her second child was a daughter, born in the first days of February 1885, and they named her Alina Rose, the Alina for the friend and the rose because it was the flower Benjamin's mother had grown in her garden, a detail he had mentioned once in passing, and which Anna had held without comment for 2 years before finding the right use for it. When he heard the name, Benjamin was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant something had moved him past words. "The rose is for your mother's garden," Anna said. "I know," he said. "Thank you." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers against the line of his jaw, and he turned his head and pressed his lips to her palm. And it was such a simple thing, but it held everything they had built, the truth of two people who had arrived at each other honestly, and stayed honestly, and built something in the space between them that was more than either of them was alone. Thomas, at 1.5 years, was fascinated by his sister in the way of toddlers, which alternated between excessive curiosity and profound indifference at random intervals. Benjamin managed this with the patient steadiness that he brought to everything, and Anna watched him with her children and felt the deep satisfaction of a woman who had made choices with her eyes open and been right about what she was choosing. The years settled into themselves the way good years do, with rhythm and variety, with difficulties that were manageable because they were met by two people working together rather than apart, with joys that were larger for being shared. The ranch grew, Benjamin adding carefully to the herd as the operation could sustain, diversifying in the way he had discussed with Anna over those early evening conversations, adding a small orchard to the south slope, and expanding the kitchen garden to a proper vegetable operation that supplied part of what the town needed. The shop grew. By 1886, Anna had moved into the larger storefront next door, the two connected by a doorway she had a carpenter cut, and Shepard's dry goods and tailoring occupied a double frontage on Main Street and employed 3 women full-time, including Margaret, who had become in all but name a co-manager, and who Anna intended to bring into formal partnership when the terms could be worked out. Benjamin's speech in the Silver Spur had passed into something like local legend, as things do in small towns when they are important enough and true enough. People told it the way they told the important stories, with the specificity that meant they had been there or had heard it from someone who was there, with the weight of something that had actually happened and mattered. The quiet rancher who told the town that Anna Shepard built her business alone, and every one of them owed her a kind word had become, in the particular mythology of redemption, one of the defining stories of the town's understanding of itself. It was a story about what a man could say when he chose to say it. It was a story about what a woman had done before anyone said anything. It was both of those things, inseparable, because that was the truth of it. Anna and Benjamin were sitting on the ranch porch on a September evening in 1886, Thomas 3 years old asleep inside, Alina Rose 18 months old asleep in her crib, the late summer evening warm but no longer oppressive, the stars beginning to emerge over the flat Texas horizon. Anna had a commissioned sketchbook open in her lap but was not drawing in it, just sitting with it the way she sometimes sat with work when the evening was too good to actually work, and she needed the feeling of it nearby. Benjamin was looking at the horizon with the specific quality of attention that meant he was content, which she had learned to read as such because it looked from the outside very similar to his troubled expression, and it had taken months to learn the difference. The difference was in the line of his shoulders and the slight forward tilt of his head that meant he was receiving rather than defending. "I have been thinking about the partnership with Margaret," Anna said. "What have you decided?" he asked. "I want to make it formal by the 1st of the year," she said. "She has earned it. The shop functions better because she is in it, and it would function better still if she had the investment and the authority that come with actual partnership." "I think that is right," he said. "What does she think about it?" "She thinks I am offering too much," Anna said. "She undervalues herself. I'm going to have to tell her directly that this is not an act of charity but an accurate assessment of her contribution." "She will believe you," Benjamin said. "She has learned to believe you." Anna looked at him in the gathering dark. "So have I," she said quietly. "It took me longer than I would like to admit." He looked back at her. "You believed me when it mattered," he said. "You made it easy," she said, which was not an easy thing to do. He reached out and took her hand, their fingers threading together the way they had done so many times now that it was as natural as breathing, and they sat in the warm September dark and listened to the sound of the ranch, the cattle settling, a night bird somewhere in the cottonwoods, the house behind them containing their sleeping children, and the vast Texas sky above them full of uncountable stars. "I was thinking," Benjamin said. "Tell me," she said. "About the orchard," he said. "I think we should add peaches to the south slope. The soil is right for it, and there's a market for it I haven't fully explored." She was quiet for a moment, and he could feel the shift in her attention from evening ease to engaged consideration, which he had always loved, the way she brought her full capability to any question she thought was worth it. "If you irrigate from the creek," she said, "you could carry the water further up the slope without losing too much. That would give you another half-acre at least." "I had not thought of that angle," he said. "I know," she said, and there was the warmth in her voice that she reserved for him, the warmth that he had earned through 9 months and 4 years, and a whole life of consistent truth. She closed the sketchbook and leaned her head against his shoulder, and he shifted his arm to accommodate her. And the ranch and the night and redemption, Texas, with all its imperfections and its history and its gradual recalibrated understanding of Anna Shepard, spread out around them in the warm dark and asked nothing of them for the moment except to be exactly where they were. The partnership with Margaret was formalized in January 1887, on a day with clear cold sunlight that came through the shop windows and made the bolts of fabric glow. Anna signed the documents with the same clean handwriting that had painted the original sign, Shepard's Dry Goods and Tailoring, and Margaret signed them with a hand that shook slightly, though she held it steady by the second page, and it was done. Benjamin had come into town for the occasion. He stood at the back of the shop while the documents were signed, and when it was finished and Anna looked up, he caught her eye across the room with the look that was entirely his, the one she had spent 5 years learning and would spend the rest of her life continuing to learn, that specific dark-eyed quiet look that said, without any words at all, that he saw her. The whole of her. The $42 and the cracked axle and the rags stuffed in the wall, and the green wool dress in the window, and the confrontation with Victor Hale and the speech in the Silver Spur, and the mornings and the evenings and the children and the years, and the woman she was when he was watching, and the woman she was when she thought no one was watching, which were the same woman, always the same woman, and he loved every version of her with the full weight of his steady and unperformative heart. She looked back at him with her winter eyes, gray-blue and absolutely certain, and the shop was full of good light and finished work, and the quiet certainty of something built to last. Anna Shepard had arrived in Redemption, Texas, on a Tuesday in November 1881 with $42 and a broken wagon wheel and a plan, and a refusal to let any of the expected obstacles become the final word. And she had built her business alone. She had mixed her own mortar. She had laid her own boards. She had painted her own sign in the moonlight when lamp oil was beyond her means. And then, in the patient and inevitable way of things that are true, the town had come to know it. Benjamin Chandler had made sure of that, standing in the lamplight of the Silver Spur with his work-roughened hands and his dark eyes and his voice that was quiet and absolutely certain, saying the words that needed to be said. Every one of you owes her a kind word, and the town, imperfect and slow and human, had eventually paid. In the spring of 1887, Anna discovered she was expecting a third child. She told Benjamin on the porch in the way she always told him things, directly and with the quality of attention that meant she was watching for the true response rather than the performed one. He smiled. A full, unguarded smile that was still, after 4.5 years, something she found astonishing in its completeness. He reached for her and held her face in his big, careful hands, and looked at her with all the love he had never been able to adequately articulate, but had learned to show in the 10,000 small and consistent ways that added up over years to a life. "Good," he said. "Good," she agreed. And in Redemption, Texas, with the spring coming on and the orchard budding on the south slope, and the shop full of good work on Main Street, and the children's voices carrying from inside the house, and the whole long future stretching out ahead of them like the wide, flat horizon, it was very good indeed.